Right, I guess we can get started. Good night and good morning and a good day, well, depends where you are. Welcome to Bioverse webinar, episode number 7. And for those new guests who are attending our webinar first time, let me give you a little bit introduction who we are. Bioverse webinar is a monthly show co-produced by SAPA GP. The full name means Sino American Pharmaceutical Professionals Association, Great Philly chapter, and in Science We Trust community. Who is SAPA GP? Well, it's a nonprofit founded, looks like 12 years ago, more than 12 years ago, more than 4,000 members, more than 160 sponsors, and more than 1,000 LinkedIn followers. It's actually one chapter of arguably the biggest ethnic Chinese pharmaceutical professional association in the world. I believe SAPA have around 10 chapters, most of them in North America, with one in China. The focus for SAPA GP is really about science, business, and career. Now get to the little bit younger partner, which is in Science We Trust community, which was founded by me and a bunch of other volunteers a few years back. It's also a nonprofit, and we are a community of the Asian biotech, by the Asian biotech, for the Asian biotech. And we're proud to have at least one C-level people from majority of China biotech in our community. And we are a global community. Our presence largely virtual, and have been growing really fast. With that being said, this, like I said, this is our 7th episode. If you are interested in what we have to say today, want to follow up a little bit more previous episode, please scan the QR code on the right, so you can have access to all the previous episodes listed on YouTube. You could also search our meeting partner. They have a replay of those episodes if you do not have access to YouTube in the US. Today, next slide, please. Sorry. Here we go. So today is really my great honor to introduce the prestigious 2 panelists and a very experienced moderator. First speaker, Hui Wang. She has been working in commercialization for many years. You can see over there. Her last job was a VP of commercialization and Takeda, in charge of many very influential assets. And she started her own consulting firm recently for the CSD partners. The second speaker, Miss Christina Asted. She is an entrepreneur. She has been working in this space also for many, many years. And her very last job was the head of commercialization of RCP. Sorry, not RCP, it's PTC, which I used to cover actually as an analyst. And she also started her own company recently with quite a few very experienced industry veterans, really focus on many aspects, particularly commercialization. Last but not least, today's moderator is our own Science We Trust volunteer and also commercial expert, Jia Minzhuo. And he has been writing a lot of very insightful commentary to our newsletter and has been our volunteer for quite a long time. And he actually used to be and Takeda as a colleague with Dr. Hui Huang. With that being said, I'm gonna pass the baton to Jiamin. Please take it from here.
Thank you, Leon. Thank you for the introduction. It's an honor to be here today to moderate this panel. As Leon mentioned, I have worked in the commercial space. Before that, I was in the consulting and in equity research at Wall Street as well. Based on my experience working in the big pharma and small biotech in the commercial space, I realized today's topic is probably the least mentioned topic in many drug discussion regarding drug development. So the reason I think it's very important actually to help our audience understand more regarding the commercial, especially the commercial strategy, is because it is not only regarding the drug launch marketing, the commercial mind actually is required in the whole process of the drug development. Impact not only the pipeline design, but also potential BD success. So as Leon mentioned today, we are very honored to invite the 2 experts in the area, Dr. Hui Huang and Christina Both of them have more than 2 decades experience in the commercialization field, covering in the global setting, including US, EU, Japan, and China. Combined, they have helped to really make the market uptake and the launch of around 10 drugs, including 2 blockbusters. So I'm honored, first of all, to let them introduce themselves to provide more background, and then we will start today's discussion. So how about Dr. Huang, would you mind to help us understand more regarding your experience?
Sure. Thank you, Jiaming. Very honored to be invited and sitting here with Christina and Jiaming. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Hui Huang. I am the founder and CEO of CSD Partners. We are a boutique consulting firm specializing in helping biotechs to optimize the clinical development strategy as well as commercial strategy to meet regulator and payers' needs and leading great commercial success. And prior to my entrepreneurship, I served many different positions in biotechs and biopharmas, focusing on outcomes research, value, reimbursement, and access. And my last position was leading Takeda Oncology's global value and access team. So we were responsible to really thinking about how we can make the best data package to serve the needs of the regulators and payers and have the best pricing and access to the patients.
Thank you and welcome here. Then, Christina, would you help us to understand more about your background?
Sure, happy to do that. And thank you for having me here, Dr. Huang and Jiaming. It's a pleasure. For myself, I said my career in the commercial space, starting with Alexion Pharmaceuticals. I was there for a number of years, always on the commercial side, was with medical marketing when that used to be a term early on. Always was the most medical of my commercial colleagues, and then had an opportunity to work on medical affairs when I was with PTC, leading their global shared medical services team focused on patient identification and diagnostics. And there was the most commercial of medical colleagues, and in both cases really had a chance to have an appreciation of the value for commercialization and what it means to the success of biotech companies and the products that we're working to develop.
Thank you very much,
Currently, I just say, and then currently I'm a co-founder and CEO of Rapid Commercialization Partners, or RCP for short, and we work with clinical stage biotech companies to optimize commercialization through strategy and execution.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christina. And sounds like you have really served many clients in this space. The first question to the panel is actually, what exactly is commercialization? Because I know many colleagues I work with, basically thinking about commercialization is just drug launch, marketing, how to make money from all the drugs. So what exactly commercialization, when expert talking about, I very happy to get Christina's help to have one slide shared by her. Let me show it. So could you use a few minutes, give us a very high level overview on what exactly is commercialization when we talk about?
Sure. Happy to do that. So commercialization is the process of bringing an asset to market. And coming to market could mean different things. It could be bringing a product all the way through to launch. It could be an earlier exit through acquisition, for example. But it is well understood from the most part that commercialization has a lot of moving parts. It is very complicated, and if it were easy, I think most people would do it and it would not be challenging. You have success across the board, but I think fundamentally there's the core components that are in blue, and it's typically thought of that's really all commercialization really is, these components that you need to make sure that you are addressing and executing on as you're thinking through the process of developing a clinical asset and bringing it through to market. But it is more than that. Each of these core components has subcategories, and each of those categories in and of themselves is complicated. And it's essential that these pieces move together in unison. It is a complex ecosystem, and if one component is lagging behind, it really affects the others. You can see that the complex interplay and interconnections between all of the components and their subcategories. And it's really essential that this process, therefore, is begun as early as possible. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to make up for lost time. And this is why we are of the mind that beginning early for commercialization, understanding the complexity and the different components that have to be addressed, can really make an impact on the development of a company and affect the area under the curve.
Thank you, Christina. I definitely can see it's a very complicated map here. I don't think, today I will not bother our audience with all the details, but just have a take-home message. It is very complicated and many pieces moving around. And you also mentioned about to have this kind of plan early on. I also have one slide also shared by you regarding the overall roadmap when to consider commercialization or other parts when we are doing the typical, R&D, preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Could you help us also highlight, what do you view the commercialization, across different stage of these drug development?
Sure. So this is a great slide, I think, that really illustrates it's a high level. Again, it's not entirely comprehensive, but it does show that at each phase of development, there's something that you can and should be doing around commercialization across different parallels. So whether you're talking about regulatory, certainly around funding, patient and market access, which is critical, and on the commercial side, that oftentimes the belief is that, well, commercial development or preparation doesn't have to be done until later on in the journey. So late phase 2, for example, sometimes even phase 3, when there's something that you can be doing as early as the preclinical stage, and not taking for granted that commercialization or that commercial preparation can just be done easily, can just be executed by hiring a commercial team, that they're, again, going back to the area under the curve, that if you start earlier, what you're going to do in preclinical doesn't look like what you're going to be doing in phase 3, but there are things that you should be doing to prepare. And the better answers you have to questions like, what is your regulatory pathway? What is your pricing? What does the market opportunity look like? These are things that drive value and value creation for your company, and can really help when speaking to investors and as you're developing your strategy and your execution of that strategy, that you understand your place in the market. And some of these things take 3 or 4 years to develop and execute on. And again, going back to the point that if you wait until phase 3, it's very hard to execute on these things that are not going to have that availability for return, because there just is not enough time allotted to accommodate for that complexity.
Thank you, Christina. Yeah, seems like, there are actually very early on where they can use commercialization's mind to set some strategy. I would like to also ask, Dr. Wang Hui, what's your experience, looking at the overall, commercialization roadmap, the conflict commercialization process? What's your experience, and what kind of common misunderstandings you feel like, with some biotech with less experience in the commercial part?
Yeah, thanks, Yami, for the question. I really like this slide because it really highlighted the continuity of our thinking. I think the biggest mistake I've seen from the biotech or scientists is thinking about clinical development and commercialization as two separate, discrete, linear stage, which is not right. And I do think some of the mistake, if you made very early, it's very difficult or expensive to fix, and it could make you completely miss your partnership opportunity or significantly impact your price tag. So I would really say, first of all, think about it very early. But if you don't know how to think about it, definitely, seek some, like ISWT, other organizations and all the knowledge is around you. And another thing is no one size fit all. Each product, each company positions are very different. So you do, and the devil's in the details. And I'll give people maybe more examples later on, how some of these details, very seemingly small decision early in the development stage can make huge impact. Just like Christina said, all these pieces are really connected, and it's like the dominoes, right? Like it will have the domino effect downstream.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I totally understand what you're talking about, the domino effect, because when I worked in the commercial department, I realized, commercialization, especially drug launch, is at receiving end of all drug development procedure or different arms. Any early decision in the, CMC, in clinical development, will eventually cascade into the commercialization and really affect value proposition and value creation. So that is very difficult to go back and redo all these, different potential small decision early on. So that is important to have this kind of mindset as early as possible. But I think it's maybe a little bit shocking to someone to look at this map and realize, in the early commercial mind is starting the strategy setting even at R&D or preclinical stage. That is very early. So I was just curious, I do have some, my own anecdote regarding how early it should be, but love to understand from the panel, right? So at that stage, why it's so early, especially for, I think, many audience from really early stage biotech, what kind of things they need to think about, in at this early stage. Definitely, probably it's not, drug launch, but what they need to think about at very early stage.
Sure.
Christina, anything? Yeah, please feel free
Yeah,
to
I
chat.
can start. Sure. So I think as I mentioned earlier, what you do in each phase differs. So I think sometimes when individuals think about commercialization, they think phase 3 launch planning and preparation. It's like that is launch planning and preparation, which is a component of commercialization, which is a much longer story. And even in preclinical, like I said, what you do in preclinical is not going to look like what you do in phase 2 or phase 3, but you have to start laying that foundation. There are what we call commercial fundamentals that have to be done. These are non-negotiable pieces of the puzzle that you have to understand and execute on. And that's things like, again, your commercial, your pricing reimbursement strategy, understanding like what is the unmet need, who are your KOLs, what is your regulatory strategy, how do you prepare to speak with the FDA, things like that. And still today, there are issues where those attributes are not appreciated and not well prepared for. I think that's the other aspect of commercialization is that readiness, that preparedness before making significant commercial decisions without adequate diligence backing up that decision. And so even in the preclinical stage, you can think about, are you talking to investors? Are you identifying what is your unmet need? Are you developing or preparing for going into phase 1 clinical trial, looking at your endpoints? And that's something that is true across the board, whether it's phase 1 or phase 2 or phase 3 clinical trials, that the commercial is involved. There's a commercial lens thinking about what are those endpoints? Are they going to be commercially viable? Are payers going to care about what it is that you're doing? And having these checks and balances along the way before you get too far down the road, make too large an investment that will be very difficult, if not impossible, to correct. I'll stop there and ask Dr. Huang for her comments as well.
Thank you, Christina. So maybe I'll tell people a story. I still remember this case. It actually happens very early in my career. When I first present this, actually one of the first ADC it's like 15 years ago, to the payer. And I was very excited about my phase 2 data, clinical data. And I give the presentation about the background, but in the end, the payer told me there's only one slide we think relevant to us. It's actually one of the preclinical slide. It demonstrating, it was actually a cell assay. The importance pieces is on the same cell platform. We demonstrated, at our drug compared with all these different comparators. What are the advantage, at least at the cell level? And we do know that disease area, the preclinical data at the cell assay does correlate to the clinical data. Because our phase 2 data is single arm, it really does not generate this comparative value from payers' eyes. The preclinical becomes very matters. So I think all these things people need to understand. And some other important decisions. I know, Jami, you have an example on the indication selection. Indication selection is huge. If that you misstep, it's really generate a lot of consequences. Dosing, vial size, huge complication on the pricing. And I want to actually talk a little bit about this examples there is a biotech team when they expanded their indication from local market to the global, they did not realize the dosing is going to be different in the sense of the vial size, because the people in the Western world tends to have heavier weight. And now all of a sudden, instead of using 2 vials of the drug, you need 3 vials. So it has huge implication on the pricing. And also not only because of that 3rd vial, it's an additional vial. I only use like 1/3 of that 3rd vial. I have like 2/3 of the waste. And in Western countries and most of the developed countries, you're not allowed to pull those vials either. So that means a huge waste. And also there are policies on the reimbursement side. If you do have wastage, you pay penalty on the commercial. So all these things are like, it has domino effects. It's just a simple decision on your dosing on the vial. It could significantly change how people think about your development plan.
Yeah, Hui, thank you very much. I really like your example, especially you mentioned about you talking to the payer, and you definitely prepare lots of slides, lots of data, but at the end, payer told you that what they care about is actually just one slide, because you compare your data with other competitors, because you address their question. So that's probably what I often see is in the early development, most of scientists are really passionate about their science, try to use their technology to help patients. But what happened very often is they most time only wear their own lens. It's R&D lens or CMC lens or clinical lens, but they did not necessarily understand what the payer's perspective, what is market's perspective, how this commercial lens could help them to see much clearly on what they expected from those market response, payers response. So I think that's very important lesson. The insight is we probably want everyone to understand that commercial lens is also very important. Sometimes, probably affect every stage of your development, because we need to address, the question regarding all these payers and markets to really bring the value. So
Absolutely, I completely
go ahead.
agree. I was just saying that I completely agree with you, John. I think you make a very important point, and that I think as you're going through this process, we work a lot of times with founders and brilliant scientists, and that's what they do best. But that the understanding the commercial side is a different skill set. And I think the best piece of advice is just to not be afraid to ask the questions and bring in the right people who have that experience that can help you do what you do and make it better. So those scientists can focus on the science, and you can bring in the commercial minded people to focus on commercial, but the commercial is what we're doing. After all, this whole process is about commercialization. And so it's important to have those pieces of that complexity understood early, and that you're going through that process of unmasking and identifying these questions that, as Dr. Hui said, can really impact your outcomes, and understanding like how are you going to enter the market, how are you going to position yourself. These are very important questions that can have profound impacts on outcomes.
Yeah, totally agree. So I think I also want to mention about my anecdote example. So I think that is talking about the indication selection. As I've talked before, most scientists, they do have a wonderful novel technology, but usually the problem is how to find the best problem to utilize their technology to become a true solution and bring the value. So that's very example is really helping our audience understand, for example, in the early commercial strategy is to select the indication for your technology. There was a small biotech in Oklahoma back in like 2 decades ago. They have a novel technology to find the antibody to treat inflammation. And however, the problem is they think about inflammation, they looking into naturally larger market like asthma. They hope, their drug can find a place in this market because, there are so many patients, it's a large market, lots of money. But what happened is they find their technology, even though it's good, however, in very crowded asthma market, there are many good enough drugs already on the market. So they cannot differentiate themselves easily in those space. What happened is they even struggle to find investor to sustain their R&D progress. Luckily, they had a new CEO coming in very soon, and the new CEO has more experience, especially regarding the commercial. So he really looked into and actually identify a novel indication. They find the same technology can treat inflammation in sickle cell, especially treating visceral crisis in the sickle cell patients. This is almost no one knows about this indication, but there is actually huge unmet need because there are no approved treatment in this space, and all these patients have to rush into ER to get this treatment when it happens. So there's a huge unmet need, and this is a burden on patient, physician, and payer side as well. So the CEO decided to switch to this new indication because this unmet need can be addressed by this drug, but also because there's less competition, very clear value proposition. They can not only get invest fund, but also after they reach phase 2 proof of concept data, the company was successfully acquired by Novartis for more than 600 million. So now the drug is already on the market, and it's a success story. But this one really gave us some insight on how to choose just single indication to find the right problem for your novel technology could really bring the value and optimize the strengths of your technology and help the overall drug development. So I think this is a very good example to help the audience understand how early commercial lens can help for the drug environment and also help the company to get support from investors to move all this progress forward.
Jiaming, can I add
Sure, go ahead.
Thoughts? Because I think indication selection, there's no doubt it's so important. But I also want to tell people is people need to pay attention to the major policy changes. Because I think many of you probably have heard in the U.S. there is big IRA is going, is a big policy, is the biggest policy change since Part D. Now all the Medicaid started, are going to negotiate for the top listing drugs, and it has huge impact. And because one of the impact that IRA has is really make pharma to think about their first indication. I think first indication selection is becoming very important because in the past, a lot of companies are taking the approach to get the first indication as the fastest. So the fastest indication would by default is their first indication, because once it's on the market, They feel like there are always the potential, to do the life cycle management. But now with the shortened LOE, loss of exclusivity, and you need to start kind of negotiating much earlier. Now, whether your indication is the biggest, this from fast to biggest change potentially impact your development strategy. So people really need to know the major market, how the policy is changing, and how that impacts your indication selection and your clinical development strategy.
Yeah, thank you, Hui. I think you bring another question I would like to ask, because most of our audience is coming from Asia. Those biotech company or even pharma company mainly focus on the local market, the commercialization, launching the local market. So the question is, if that's the case, they only want to probably sell their overseas rights to a big partner to let them handle all the commercialization overseas. Why these small companies still need to pay attention in the global changes, like US market you just mentioned about IRA, maybe in the EU part. So why do they still need to worry or at least be aware of this change in the global market? Could you help them understand, the important implications there?
Thank you, Jiaming. I think this is a very good question because a lot of people ask me the similar questions. But if you really look inside of this question, it has some kind of a premise or assumption, which is a little bit problematic, because the assumption number one, I think people assume one is their local market and global are two separate things. But there's a clear connection. The more leverage you can get, the local partner can get from your local, global partner can get from your local data, the higher value they would have, right? And two is the assumption of the early development and the later commercialization are separate. So therefore, they think, whatever they do in the early, they can let the partners do the rest. But whatever partner's doing is highly rely on what you have already done early. So some of the mistakes I mentioned before. So this is why I want to bring up this concept of global relevance. So if you don't understand the global commercialization strategy, you will likely to generate or come up with a development strategy or data package that are globally irrelevant. We've seen many cases, what I called the data are globally irrelevant. For example, wrong comparator selection without thinking about the treatment patterns, in the other major global markets. We mentioned about, the vial size and, the dosings. Those are all global relevance pieces. And the second thing is, so clearly, actually for that vial size cases, we actually calculated if we want to fix that mistake, how much it would take for our CMC. It turned out it would take us 6 to 9 months to fix that small mistakes. 6 to 9 months, that's huge. From the pharma side, that means, potentially you lose your differentiation, potentially you shorten your peak year sales. So those are huge impact mistakes. If your data don't have global relevance, when you design your dosing, you don't think about the global population, the weights, and all these things as well. So the second thing is, if you do think about the global strategy, and you actually, first of all, you make yourself much more credible and trustworthy, because now you can see from my lens. I think that trustworthy, credible are priceless when you're thinking about the partnership. If the pharma side feel like you have the knowledge, you understand, because the term sheets, whatever you can put on the term sheets are limited. You don't know what you don't know. I can't cover everything I can think about from our partnership down the road are going to be captured on the term sheet. So I have to rely on my trust of your strategic vision, your knowledge to think about there are no, kind of silly mistakes, right? So I to be able to understand and demonstrate your knowledge, your deliberately think about those are going to be very important, for biotechs to seeking the global partnership.
Thank you. Christina, I know you're also working in EU, both, oversee, different markets. What's your comments or insights you can share?
Sure. Well, very, very similar in many ways, to say that it's important to understand where your indication is going to have relevance, and understanding where the markets make sense for you to enter. And then what is your strategy to enter those markets? Which are you going to enter first, and why? And there's pricing implications to why you would enter a certain market versus another. Where patients are, or you need to understand where are your patients, and not just where the patients are, but the patients exist in a market where you can have reimbursement. I think there are certainly not only business, but ethical considerations and concerns with entering a market, let's say, and discussing a potential therapy in a market where you're probably never really going to have the opportunity to commercialize, or you may never get reimbursement. So those are things that you have to take into consideration early. And I think it can be sometimes exciting to say, oh, there's lots of patients in this country, and we can just, it means like we're going to generate all this revenue. And that's a very simplistic view. To really understand what it's going to take to enter that country, how you're going to distribute, what does it look like to really have a presence, a commercial presence in that market. Is it a commercial presence? Is it compassionate use? Is it early access? Like, what are the different ways that you can enter? And also thinking about this early. So there's certainly commercial presence in the traditional thought, but maybe some markets it might be beneficial to have some other pre-marketing authorization program in place. So it really takes a lot of diligence to understand the global market. I really think that is, I echo Hoyt's comments on that as well, to do your homework, do the diligence, understanding where your patients are, but also what is the regulatory landscape in each of those markets, and what are the implications around pricing. And that will really help dictate which country would be your first entry point, and triaging from there based on what makes sense from a business, and also that clinical perspective. So where is that unmet need the most significant, that's going to drive the largest value for what you're trying to bring to market?
Thank you. I really love our conversation. Let me just share, stop sharing the slides, but talking more about, the details and the nitty-gritties. So you mentioned, Christina, and also Hui, I think a very good, important insights to care about the global market. I also remember you guys mentioning about, many company understanding how important large US market is, they pay lots of attention. But on the EU side, sometimes you feel like they underestimate the challenges to really get a commercial success in this place. They probably spend less resource over the study or things. I just try to understand more regarding that part. What do you see the potential problem if they underestimate the challenge to move into EU or Japan market?
Sure, I can start. Or
Go
sure,
ahead.
just at a high level, I think, again, it's really important to understand where the unmet need is that you address, thinking about the pricing. So it depends, right? Which country you're going to go into may dictate a particular price potential. And so that is some thoughtful consideration in terms of where there is open negotiation, where there isn't, which other countries may look to for setting a precedent for pricing. So those are some considerations that you want to think through very carefully initially, and that goes hand in hand again with where are the patients. There's also considerations for data capture in terms of, at least from the US going into Europe, how data is collected in a clinical trial. You may have to think about that from an earlier perspective as you're going into different markets, because if the data is not arranged in a certain way or presented in a way that a particular country is looking for, it could delay your market entry or make it very expensive to do so.
Thanks. Wait. Anything
Yeah,
to
sure.
add?
So I think EU market is a tricky one because I actually someone just passed me this data. I think for the past several years, if you look at all the drugs that launched in the US, I think 42% did not launch in Europe. It's a very high number. And remember, it was pretty shocking. So I think the number one question people want to think about is why they don't launch in Europe. And there are quite some launched and pull back. I think just in Germany, I think if you look at, I remember, if I remember right, the number of the drugs launch and then pull back was like 27 or something in total. And
including
part
like Bluebird.
was, there was you know, one in the old days, 1 year of free pricing, now 6 months free pricing, but then after they review your data package, says, no, you can't charge this high, you have to go this low, and the company cannot take that low price, and they decided to leave. But they don't know also German is not just a German influenced so many countries in Europe and outside of Europe, like German price was referenced by more than 30 countries. And if you don't launch your German, you're pretty much done with Europe. So I think it's a lot of these discussion, and Europe as a whole has very high reimbursement bar. It is a market that you don't have the reimbursement, you pretty much don't have the prescription for a lot of the major markets. So, and also these reimbursement process are very lengthy and long. And we had to pretty much, start thinking about your market access in Europe as early as you start thinking about your CDP and regulatory discussion. And I always tell people the best time to negotiate or discuss with payer is when they still see you as an innovator in the development stage, instead of you sitting at the other side of the table as a negotiator. So if you only think about the payer when you're sitting at the opposite side of the table, you're already on the disadvantaged position. So I think people really need to understand that. And that's a very important challenge for Europe.
I really love your comments. You say that it's very important because at early on, as a drug developer, you're coming to payers, you're coming to this community, try to provide an innovative solution to the payer and to the patients. That time actually, payers see you as a partner because payers see, hey, because payers' purpose is also to solve this problem, bring value to the patient, to the whole system. So at the time, if you come in early and you come in as a partner, so they are more willing to work with you, to help you, and building the relationship. I heard about from last clinical development webinar, but seems like it's also a relationship with payers, with all these players in this ecosystem. So if it coming early and you are willing to be a partner, so you will get much better relationship building early on, and they will probably inform you and help you to make some clinical design, evidence generation. So that way it will be much easier to form the relationship. I also heard sometimes, even become a differentiation advantage compared to your competitors, because your competitor may not have such a good relationship, or, if you, the first one in this drug class, for example, talk to the payers, talk to them, they will see you as the default partner. And in this case, you can't get advantage if you really understand, the situation, and that would be much better than you come late. You just be the last thought is the EU payer or any payer just say, hey, we're going to launch very soon. Could you reimburse it? So that time they will see you kind of play the system. You just want to get what you want. You don't care about their payers' needs. So that would make a situation much harder and tougher. So
agreed.
This is a very important, Kristen.
Yeah, and I was just going to add a comment. I completely agree with everything that's being said. And I think that's why it's important to have conversations early with things like payer ad boards, begin those discussions at an earlier time point where you're seen as a partner, understanding like this is the benefit that we're trying to bring to patients. We believe in the benefit and what this is going to provide for patients and their families. What is the best way? And that have those discussions early. And as you said, that you can get feedback from payers that you can take back that it's going to affect your clinical trial design. It could affect your strategy. You don't necessarily know all the feedback that you're going to get and how it's going to benefit you, but you have to start those discussions early, not only with payers, right, but with treaters. So with KOLs, who are your key opinion leaders? Maybe it makes sense to have interactions with patient advocacy groups as well. If you're talking about a rare disease, this will be particularly important. But showing that you are coming to the table with a educated understanding of what you're trying to accomplish, that you want to be a partner, and that you're sharing data, sharing feedback. This is something else that I have seen where there's a reluctance to share data also with KOLs or share data with regulators and payers. It is somewhat counterintuitive because these are people that and organizations that you're going to need. They are the gatekeepers for your success, and so it only behooves you to build those relationships, as you said earlier, Jimin, about relationship building. It is a lot of relationship building, but understanding and not making assumptions. I think we get into trouble if you make an assumption about where you think your product is going to be most beneficial, or are you really answering a true unmet need? Have you done the investigation to justify that investment? But I think going back to the question around, getting engaged, I think with payers earlier, getting engaged with those markets, talking to patient organizations, talking to hospital systems or physicians and clinicians who are going to be identifying those patients, treating those patients, all of those components, going back to the complexity, right, of commercialization. It's not just one thing. So you're not only just going to talk to payers by themselves, it's payers and all of these other components that are built around the payer. And you have to do those together to have truly a full picture of what you're trying to accomplish, and how, as Dr. Huang said, when you're going in, why Germany first? Why is it important to go to Germany and not another country? Are you going to do a pre-marketing authorization? What country does it make sense to do that? Can you set your price in that country or not? So there are lots of conversations and I think points that probably beyond the scope of this call that can get very detailed and complex, but are necessary to have.
Thank you. So I think that's great insights we already shared here. But probably for most of the majority company, biotechs, they never think about the commercialization, at least never think about the drug launch, right? They only focus on R&D. So my question for follow up this one is, if they just want to, do a BD deal, just sell their assets, in the clinical, even preclinical stage, do they still need to think about, commercialization? And especially, I understand there are many questions, interest regarding the deal making, BD part. What the commercial mind can help them to benefit them in this kind of, BD or, deal term sheets perspective.
So I think, yes, it is important. And it goes back to the early conversation of fundamentals, and understand like what you need to do at that level. So it's understanding where you are is going to drive how deep you go in the commercial preparation, but still those fundamentals are important. And you have to understand like what is the end goal, right? If you understand what you're trying to achieve, it's going to help prepare you for today. So understanding, going back to, again, in those very early on, what is the unmet need truly that you're trying to address? You have to make sure that what you're working on is more than just an important, it could be significant science experiments. But is it going to be clinically relevant? Is it going to be commercially viable? So you have to understand the unmet need, have some sense about who you're going to treat, how are you going to access those patients. So at a high level, even in the preclinical phase, it's important to have that understanding, and nothing, I think, at that phase is going to be more critical than that unmet need that you're identifying, the why behind what you're trying to develop.
Wei, I think
Yeah.
you also work with, some involving some BD transactions or things as well. Would love to get your insight.
Yeah, I think as long as people wants to sell their global commercial rights, then they need to know what they're selling and what it's worth, right? So you have to have some kind of understanding. And I think, for scientists, if you don't want to understand, all the nuances of the things, at least you should have some high level, right? High level means like you need to understand what's going to be on the term sheet and what are some of the key drivers of your value, right? So I think from the pharma side, I normally think about when I look at whether it's a asset or strategic planning, I put the value into like 3 buckets. One is your immediate launching. Immediate launching normally, if you're already in phase 3 or late stage, it's pretty certain in terms of what kind of the value it can bring, because you already have some kind of phase 2 data and you can forecast the revenue. Of course, you can still influence on some assumptions that the buyer side are thinking, right? By providing or by deliberately collecting some information from your local market. I think I mentioned this to some of you. For example, the duration of the treatment and drug utilization in the real world. A lot of people use the clinical trial data as the proxy and add some discount on that. But if you feel like you have better information, beat the default, you'd better collect it, right? So that's the first bucket. It's your immediate launching. And then the second bucket is your potential from your development plan, your life cycle management, your additional indication, right? So that bucket, I can see the spectrum of the value go from 0 to significant. The company who are smart to design their life cycle management and additional indication drive significant value on this part. But I'm also saying I personally signed a lot of indications 0 because they're globally irrelevant. People did not think about, they put big money in phase 3 and then with the wrong comparator. That's not even relevant to me. So then that whole indication is value 0 to me. So I think that big bucket of the clinical development is very important. That's what you can control with. And you want to show the potential. So sometimes design some smaller trials to show potential and give the flexibility to your future partners going to be very important, because you're teasing them with the potential instead of fixing and by making big mistakes, right? So the third bucket, what I call is the synergy, strategic synergy part of the value. That part, that's why the relationship part is going to be important, right? The synergy, they feel right and they feel like, well, that's first of all, they feel right and they feel you have the strategic vision, but very importantly, whether it fits their own pipeline, address their gap. If by combining with yours, does that expand their own pipelines and giving their salespeople a continuity and leverage whatever their sales force and medical field force? That's going to be very important. However, I would say for that third bucket, except for building that trust pieces, there's very little you can control about. That value is it's what buyers assign, right? So I think what you can have the best control is the middle bucket, and maybe have some in the first bucket.
I see. Thank you. So you are carrying that, again, to understand, especially, like you mentioned, the second bucket, doing some early clinical development, whatever, but in wearing a correct commercial lens, not just based on what you believe or you look at the local market or what's the convenient with you, but thinking about at the global commercial lens to identify what will bring the best value to the table, to understand, as you mentioned at the beginning, if you want to sell something, you want to know the value, right? You don't want to be a low ball offer.
Right.
You really, and also it is your responsibility to show the evidence, to show that your assets really worth that much. So to do that, you need to do your research. You need to understand how other party view your assets value, and you understand how to best positioning your assets in this way so that the other party in the BD negotiation, in the deal side, they can acknowledge it, saying, hey, you bring this piece of evidence. So I acknowledge it. I think, yeah, this is something I did not know before or I did not look into. But with this evidence, I acknowledge that you have this value. For example, like what you just mentioned, the treatment duration, because most company, I was there, when we do assessment, we just simply taking the clinical trial and see how many times they use and put a discount. But if your company really have some real evidence on your treatment duration, maybe it's higher than what we normal estimated, bring this value evidence here to the table. That will really help you to negotiate a much better offer deserve to your assets. So
I
these
would
are
add to
all.
that too.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would add it's about validation, right? Market validation that, especially if you're considering for an acquisition or BD, what is the value? What value bringing to the table? That value is really defined by the unmet need. How large is that market opportunity? Your differentiation. So competitive intelligence is important. How do you going to fit into that market? Why are you better? And how much you can't be just as good. You need to be better than. And why, for the indication positioning, which market are you going to enter, which therapeutic area market, as opposed to commercial market, and why. And so these things drive value, your pricing, your regulatory strategy. I know an investor quite well, and he said, I'd be the one at the table, and everyone's talking about the science and how great it is, and it's going to, you have all these patients that you're going to help. And now I was the one saying, well, how are we going to get it paid for? How is it going? How are you going? What is the wheels that are going to move it forward? And these are questions you have to have a good answer to. So if you can answer them well, that drives value, and it's going to, I think, set a precedent for where you want to be in your term sheet and a negotiation from a much higher value inflection point than you would normally be if you didn't have a good sense of your market opportunity, a good sense of pipeline, that it's not just maybe one drug. You have other plans for what you're trying to develop, and these things in unison together speak to value.
Thank you. So I think we have like 4 minutes left for this webinar. That's great discussion. So before we answer maybe a few questions from the audience, I want to ask the last question relevant to the audience is, based on today's discussion, it seems like commercialization and lots of strategy is complicated. How could all these biotech, to get these insights, what can they do to learn more about this commercial lens? Could you provide some resource, anything where they can seek help?
Sure, happy to. So I can say certainly, so as a CEO and founder of RCP, or Rapid Commercialization Partners, we're always happy to have conversations and share knowledge and see if we can help in companies as they learn to develop their commercial strategies from a global perspective or entering the US market. I think that there are certainly professional organizations that are important to go and continue developing, like what is being done within Science We Trust, and sharing knowledge and relationship building as well, and asking questions, I think is most critical. Is do what you do well and surround yourselves with other people who do what they do well. And if you are a science founder, let's say, and you maybe commercial is not what you know very well, then bring in the right people to help guide you and ask those questions. Can make a very significant difference in your development at a very critical time point.
Wait.
Yeah, I cannot agree with Christina more. I think if there's one message I can tell the audience is play your strength, and that bring other professional play their strength as well. So I think it's this is a field that require that close collaborations, and the devil is in the details, and you don't know what you don't know sometimes. And the fact that you are listening to this webinar is already a very important step, because you find that needs. The next is how we can help you to ask the right question. It's very important you ask the right question at the right timing. So, I think that's also why my boutique consultancy is also, we are set it up trying to help small biotechs, because I do think with a lot of the new technologies, and we have the opportunity to outpace or to beat some of the larger organizations. So I think I would really encourage people to continuously learning and surrounded with expertise who can complement your strengths.
Thank you. I also just want to remind audience, our In Science We Trust community also have newsletters and such kind of webinar, maybe not provide, specific, advice, but provide general discussion regarding the commercial topics, to bridging you to other experts as well. So Leon, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, we do have a few questions. The first one's from Chen Zhegao from Takeda. His question goes like this: with the decreasing ROI in biotech and pharma investment and the price regulatory trend in the US, is biopharma biotech still a good business to invest? Wow, philosophical question, really important question. What's your response to the panel?
I really believe. Oh, go ahead, Christine.
No, I was going to say, please start.
Yeah, I think there's always a balance between thinking about, pro innovation versus pro access and affordability. But I do believe innovation is very important, and pushing that limit is our whole, the whole world. We should really work together, pushing that limit and pro innovation. And while I acknowledge the ROI is decreasing for the whole industry, but I also want to remind people the new technology and digital world is really booming. I just gave a presentation on the digital endpoint side. You can see by using those more sensitive tools, people can significantly reduce their sample size, by half, by 90% in some cases, and significantly accelerate these kind of technology, drug development, and decrease the cost. So don't underestimate the technology, what technology can bring.
Christina?
I would add to that. I completely agree with that comment in terms of, and also thinking like how best to use certain technologies. Everyone, AI, of course, is a hot topic, and everyone wants to use AI, but making sure you're doing it in the right ways to use appropriate use of technology and software. And the other point that I would make is I strongly believe certainly the biopharma is still worth investing in, and innovation is worth investing in. But I think what happens though, certainly with situations like the IRA, you have less opportunity for error. I mean, it was never okay in many ways, I would say, to have situations where you have to course correct, and it's a delay of many months and sometimes years, and who suffers at the end of that are the patients who are not going to get their therapies. And so I think it really underscores the importance of understanding what you're doing and how you're going to get there. And so that goes back again to early commercial readiness and preparation, because there's less room for error, and it's more important to streamline your approach, be more capital efficient. And when you do those things, you're naturally going to accelerate your process. So move slow to move fast, and do that in a capitally efficient way. And I think that's going to really speak to the opportunity of maximizing ROI in what is generally has been in recent years a capitally constrained environment.
Thank you very much,
one
Leon.
sentence. So one sentence to this question. I really want this dear to my heart about ROI. Don't forget, Eli Lilly right now is 9th biggest company in the world by market cap. I just check it, it's over $700 billion US. How many companies bigger than that? And this happened in the past 2 or 3 years. A lot of people say, okay, biopharma is not doing well. Depends. If you look at the index, probably just in line, a little bit underperform SP 500. But if you ask a specialist investor, which Jamie and I used to serve, those people are doing fantastically well. So if you don't believe me, go to check all those specialist, healthcare specialist investment fund, their performance in the past 10 years. You're gonna be shocked. That's one. Another question actually come from another platform. Speaking about the commercial plan, how does a solid commercial plan play the role they really play when the small biotech pitch their asset to the big pharma? I'm pretty sure, Hui and Christina used to be part of a due diligence team to look at the pitch from the small biotech when they try to unload some, not re-unload, sell or partner BD their asset to you guys and your former employer. How important they are? How do you look at them?
So maybe
you can start.
Yeah, I can start. Like I said, first of all, if I see a solid commercialization plan and, with my, well, first of all, I will take a look. I will try to validate a lot of the assumptions and their conclusions. And, but if I turn out, kind of agree with what they come up with, I trust them, right? So I think that's really important. I trust their judgment. I trust their knowledge, and I feel like they can see from my lens. It's going to be very important. And second, I can count, like I said, the spreadsheet, whatever the term sheet that ended up cannot capture everything. If I feel like I can trust you have a commercial sense, then I can imagine you would have less mistakes that I need to fix. So it gives me that comfort and confidence to at least have a conversation with you. I think that's very important.
And I think for my part, that the commercialization plan for me is important because it means that that individual, the company, has really thought through the long term. They're thinking about what does the end look like, and not just looking at one piece of the puzzle independently of the rest of those components that we talked about initially, that you're really understanding it's not just about the science, it's about the commercial side. It's about how am I going to get to market? How am I going to get this paid for? That you have a sense of what the order of operations is, that it's maybe not just one asset in the pipeline, maybe there's multiple indications. So you're really thinking about the market opportunity in totality, that you have a sense, again, going back to unmet need, which is something I can't stress enough, and the patients. I've also been in situations where the number of patients is perhaps overpromised, and there's not diligence there to say, like, are those viable patients for treatment? Are there patients everywhere? Are they in addressable markets? Is it a severe disease where you have finite time to bring that therapy to market? And in very severe cases, sometimes those patients may not live long enough to see your treatment. And that's another reason why being expedient in your process is important. So for me, I think that when you can show an investor, and certainly doing diligence, you have a full commercial plan, you've answered a lot of these critical pillars that are going to drive success, that gives confidence to me in our development, drives confidence in the team, that team that's executing on behalf of that particular company has the experience to be successful long term.
Yeah, I just want to add that if you can really have a solid commercial plan, you are definitely going to win more internal champion from the other BD partner, and also you are more likely to validate your value creation. The money or milestone payment you are want to get is more likely to be validated from the negotiation.
Sure,
Yeah,
certainly.
Sorry, Jiaming, it really means true real money and time as well from the buyer side. I had the case that the biotech came in with very solid commercial plan. They already even scheduled meetings with some of the reimbursement agent in Europe. And we know to just get that appointment, it normally takes like 3 to 6 months to get that appointment. They already made it for us. So that significantly kind of move our timeline for certain things much earlier. So that really true money and money saving, time and money saving from our side.
Yeah, that's fantastic discussion. I just want to share one quick thought. Obviously I'm a BD guy. I talk to the big pharma BD head quite often, like almost on a daily basis. They always remind me there's two numbers I should keep in my mind. The first one is PTRS, probability of technical regulatory success. The second one is risk-adjusted NPV. I think you have a good commercial plan. The first one, PTRS, help a little bit, not so much, but the second one tremendously helpful if you think about it, right? The NPV is really a peak sale, right? Adjusted by your probability of, like your risk really get approved, right? You have a solid commercial plan. You have a very good starting point for your negotiation, if you think about it. So the negotiation gonna start with your turn instead of a turn from your partner. Right? You want to have the negotiation start with the stage you set, and that's the anchor point. Then you can go up or go down, but not too much. But of course, that really depends on you have a solid, convincing, and a reliable commercial plan. Which that's what we hope today gonna give the audience a little bit of flavor how to get there. With that being said, thank you everyone today. Christina, Hui, and Jami, you did a fantastic moderation and learned so much on the side. So thank you. And also for the audience, if you have registered this event through our Zoom link, you will receive a replay and probably a slide deck if we get a permission from the audience later on. If you are not, you probably have to wait a little bit. Well, that's a teaser. Next time, if you really want to get the first-time replay, you probably want to register through the QR code we share from our flyer. With that being said, thank you everyone. Enjoy your night, enjoy your day, and enjoy your fresh start today. And see you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
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 Bye.